The diner smelled like burnt coffee and fried eggs. Morning rush. Plates clattering. A young waitress carried a tray toward the window booth when a spoon slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. She froze. Her voice cracked across the crowded room. "I can't close my legs. It hurts." A few people laughed. Some looked annoyed. But then the man sitting alone by the window stood up slowly. A single dad. Nobody knew his name. What he did next made the entire room go silent. Not a sound, not a breath, just silence. Ryan Cole had been sitting in the same booth for 3 mornings straight. Corner spot by the window. Good view of the street. Not much to look at. Just a gas station across the road and a row of tired storefronts that hadn't changed in years. But it was quiet enough to think. The coffee was cheap. The eggs came fast. And nobody asked questions. He dropped his daughter off at school every morning at 7:45. The diner was 2 blocks away. By 8, he was here. By 8:30, he was back on the road, heading to whatever job he'd lined up for the day. Drywall work, painting, hauling junk, whatever paid. He didn't complain. He had a kid to feed and rent to make. That was the deal when you raised a daughter on your own. The booth smelled faintly of grease and old vinyl. The table had a crack running through the center, patched with duct tape that had gone gray from use. Ryan didn't mind. He'd sat in worse places, done worse work. This was just another stop in a long string of mornings that all looked the same. Coffee, eggs, toast, then back to the truck. He glanced at the menu even though he always ordered the same thing. 2 eggs over easy, bacon, wheat toast, black coffee, no sugar. He'd been coming here long enough that the older waitress usually had it ready before he asked. But she wasn't here today. Someone new was working the floor. The girl looked young, maybe early 20s. Blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that swung when she moved. She wore the same uniform as everyone else. Black pants, white button-up shirt. A small apron tied around her waist. But something about the way she carried herself felt off. Not rude, not slow, just stiff. Like every step hurt. Ryan watched her move between tables. She smiled at customers, took orders, refilled coffee cups. But her movements were careful. Too careful. The kind of careful that came from pain you were trying to hide. He'd seen it before, in himself. In other people who couldn't afford to take a day off even when their body begged them to stop. She made her way to his booth eventually. Her smile was polite but thin. Her eyes looked tired. Not sleepy tired. Bone tired. The kind that settled into your shoulders and didn't leave. "Morning," she said. Her voice was steady but soft. She pulled a notepad from her apron pocket. "What can I get you?" Ryan glanced up. 2 eggs, over easy. Bacon. Wheat toast. Coffee. She wrote it down without looking at the pad. "Got it. Anything else?" "That's it." She nodded and turned to go. But as she stepped away, Ryan noticed the way she walked. Each step was deliberate, controlled, like she was bracing against something. He didn't say anything. It wasn't his business. People had their reasons for showing up to work when they shouldn't. He'd done it plenty of times himself. The diner filled up fast. Morning rush. Construction workers. Truckers. A couple of guys in suits grabbing breakfast before heading to the office. The noise level rose. Plates clinking. Forks scraping. Conversations overlapping. The cook shouted orders from the back. The older waitress moved through the chaos like she'd done it 1,000 times. The new girl tried to keep up. Ryan sipped his coffee and kept his eyes on the street outside. The gas station sign flickered. A dog trotted past the window. A man in a dirty jacket leaned against the wall near the entrance, smoking a cigarette. Normal morning, nothing special. His eggs arrived 10 minutes later. The new waitress balanced the plate in one hand and a coffee pot in the other. She set the plate down gently, refilled his cup without asking, and gave him a quick nod before moving to the next table. Ryan picked up his fork and started eating. The eggs were fine. The bacon was crisp. The toast was warm, same as always. He ate slowly, no rush. He had a job later that morning, but it didn't start until 10. Plenty of time. He liked this part of the day, the quiet before the work began. The few minutes where he didn't have to talk to anyone or explain anything, just food and coffee and the hum of other people's conversations filling the space around him. The new waitress came back a few minutes later. She was clearing the table next to his, stacking plates, wiping down the surface. Her hands moved quickly, but her body stayed rigid. Ryan noticed the way she shifted her weight from one leg to the other, like standing still hurt more than moving. She picked up the stack of plates and turned toward the kitchen, but as she stepped away from the table, her foot caught the edge of the booth. Not hard, just a small trip, enough to throw off her balance. The plates rattled but didn't fall. She steadied herself, but in the process, a spoon slipped from the top plate and hit the floor with a sharp clang. The sound cut through the noise of the diner. A few heads turned. The waitress froze. She stared down at the spoon like it had betrayed her. Her shoulders tensed. Her jaw tightened. Ryan could see it from where he sat. The frustration, the embarrassment, the pain. She stood there for a moment. Just stood. The stack of plates still in her hands, the spoon on the floor between her feet. And then she spoke. Her voice cracked, not loud, but loud enough that the tables nearest to her went quiet. "I can't close my legs. It hurts." Ryan stopped chewing. The words hung in the air, raw, unfiltered. The kind of thing you say when you're too tired to care how it sounds. When the pain is so bad you forget where you are. A man at the counter laughed, short, sharp, like he'd just heard the punchline to a dirty joke. A woman 2 tables over shook her head and muttered something to the person across from her. A guy in a baseball cap smirked and nudged his friend. The friend grinned. The waitress didn't move. Her face flushed red. Her hands gripped the plates tighter. She looked down at the spoon again, then at the people staring at her. Her lips parted like she wanted to explain, but nothing came out. Ryan set his fork down. He didn't look at the waitress. He looked at the people around her, the ones laughing, the ones whispering, the ones shaking their heads like she'd just done something wrong. And he felt something tighten in his chest. Not anger, not quite. Just a familiar ache, the kind that came from watching someone get judged for something they couldn't control. He knew that look on her face. He'd worn it himself, 3 years ago, when his ex-wife left, when he showed up to a job site with his daughter in the truck because he couldn't afford daycare, when people assumed things about him because he was a single dad who didn't have his life together, when they looked at him like he was less than, like he'd failed. He didn't know this girl, didn't know her name, didn't know her story. But he knew that look. And he knew what it felt like to stand in a room full of people who didn't care enough to understand. The manager appeared from the back, a thin man with graying hair and a permanent frown. He walked over to the waitress with his arms crossed. His voice was low but sharp. Ryan couldn't hear the words, but he could see the way the girl's shoulders sagged, the way her head dropped. She bent down slowly, carefully. Her hand reached for the spoon. She winced. The manager said something else. She nodded, picked up the spoon, straightened up with visible effort. The stack of plates wobbled in her hands. She turned and walked toward the kitchen. Every step looked like it cost her something. Ryan watched her go. The room started to fill with noise again. Conversations picked back up. Forks clinked against plates. The cook shouted another order, but Ryan didn't move. He sat there with his coffee cooling in front of him and his eggs half-eaten. And he thought about the way people laughed, the way they judged, the way they turned pain into a joke because it was easier than caring. And something shifted. Not a decision, not yet, just a feeling, a quiet certainty that if he did nothing, this moment would stay with him, that he'd walk out of this diner and spend the rest of the day thinking about what he should have done. He didn't know what he was going to do. But he knew he wasn't going to sit there and let it happen. The waitress came back out from the kitchen 30 seconds later. Her face was still flushed. Her eyes were down. She carried a fresh pot of coffee and moved between tables like nothing had happened. But Ryan could see the tremor in her hands. The way she gripped the pot too tight. The way she avoided looking at anyone directly. She stopped at a table near the counter. 2 women in their 40s. Office clothes. One of them looked up as the waitress approached. The woman's expression was sharp, judgmental. She didn't say anything, but her eyes said enough. The waitress refilled their cups quickly and moved on. The women leaned toward each other and started whispering. One of them laughed quietly. The other shook her head. Ryan watched it happen. He didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. People always said the same things, always made the same assumptions. It was easier to laugh than to ask, easier to judge than to care. The man at the counter was still smirking. He turned to the guy next to him and said something Ryan couldn't hear. The other man grinned and glanced over at the waitress. She was refilling another cup. Her shoulders were hunched, her movements were fast, rushed, like she wanted to disappear. Ryan picked up his coffee and took a sip. It was lukewarm now. He didn't care. He wasn't tasting it anyway. His mind was somewhere else, somewhere 3 years back, standing in a grocery store parking lot with his daughter crying in the back seat because he'd forgotten her stuffed animal at home. A woman walking past had looked at him like he was doing something wrong, like a man alone with a kid was automatically suspicious. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The look was enough. The waitress moved to the next table. An older man in a flannel shirt. He waved her off before she could pour. She nodded and turned away. Her legs shook with each step. Ryan could see it from across the room. She wasn't limping. Not exactly. But every movement looked forced, controlled, like she was holding herself together by sheer will. She made it halfway back to the kitchen when the manager stepped out again. He intercepted her near the counter. His voice was low but firm. Ryan couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Correction. Warning. The waitress nodded quickly. Her hands tightened around the coffee pot. The manager said something else. She nodded again. He walked away. She stood there for a moment. Just stood. The coffee pot hung loose in her hand. Her head tilted down. Her breathing was shallow. Ryan could see her chest rising and falling too fast. She was trying not to cry. He recognized that too. The fight to keep it together in public. The desperation to make it through the shift without breaking. A man in a baseball cap called out from a booth near the door. He waved his hand impatiently and pointed at his empty cup. The waitress turned and walked over. She refilled his coffee without a word. The man didn't thank her, didn't look at her, just picked up his phone and kept scrolling. She moved on. Ryan set his cup down and leaned back against the booth. The diner was still busy. People ate, talked, laughed. The world kept moving like nothing had happened, because for most of them, nothing had. A waitress said something awkward. People laughed. Life went on. It was that simple. But Ryan couldn't let it go. He looked at the man at the counter, still smirking, still making jokes. He looked at the 2 women whispering, at the guy in the baseball cap who didn't bother to say thank you, at the manager who cared more about appearances than people. And he felt the weight of it, the casual cruelty, the indifference. The waitress came back toward his section. She was carrying a tray now, plates stacked high. She moved carefully, too carefully. Her face was pale. Her jaw was clenched. She made it to the table next to his and started setting plates down. The couple sitting there didn't acknowledge her, didn't say thank you, didn't look up from their phones. She finished and turned to leave. But as she stepped back, her leg buckled, just slightly, just enough that the tray tilted. A fork slid off and hit the floor. The sound rang out, sharp, metallic. The couple looked up. The woman frowned. The man sighed. The waitress bent down immediately. Her knees shook. Her hand reached for the fork, but she stopped halfway. Her breath caught, her face twisted. She straightened up slowly and left the fork on the floor. She turned and walked toward the kitchen. Faster now, barely holding it together. The woman at the table leaned toward her partner and said something. The man shrugged. They went back to their phones. The fork stayed on the floor. Nobody moved to pick it up. Ryan's hands tightened around his coffee cup. He stared at the fork lying there. A small thing, meaningless, but it felt bigger than that. It felt like proof that people didn't see, didn't care, didn't try. The waitress came back out. Her eyes were red now. She'd been crying. She tried to hide it, wiped her face with the back of her hand, straightened her apron, picked up another tray. But Ryan saw it, the crack in the armor. The moment when holding it together stopped being possible. She walked toward a table near the window, an older woman sitting alone. The waitress set down a plate of pancakes and refilled the woman's water glass. The older woman smiled at her, a small smile, kind. The waitress smiled back, fragile, grateful. It was the first kind thing Ryan had seen anyone do for her all morning, but it didn't erase the rest. It didn't undo the laughter, the whispers, the judgment. The manager came out again. He scanned the room. His eyes landed on the fork still lying on the floor near the couple's table. His expression darkened. He walked over to the waitress and said something. She looked down, nodded. He pointed at the fork. She nodded again. She walked over to the couple's table, bent down, slowly. Her hand reached for the fork. She grabbed it, started to stand, but her knee gave out. She caught herself on the edge of the table. The couple looked up, annoyed. The woman said something. The waitress mumbled an apology and straightened up. She turned and walked toward the kitchen. The fork clutched tight in her hand. Her face blank, empty. Ryan couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't sit there and watch her break. Couldn't watch people treat her like she was invisible, like her pain didn't matter, like she was disposable. He made a decision. Not a loud one, not a dramatic one, just a quiet choice to do something, to be the kind of person he wanted his daughter to become. He reached into his wallet and pulled out 3 $20 bills. His breakfast cost $8. He didn't care. He stood up. His boots scraped against the floor. A few people glanced over. He didn't look at them. He walked toward the counter, toward the manager standing near the register. The manager looked up as Ryan approached. His expression was neutral, professional. Ryan stopped in front of him. He didn't smile, didn't soften his voice. He just spoke, clear, steady. "I want to settle up." The manager nodded and picked up a pen. "Sure." The breakfast was $8. Ryan set the 320s on the counter. "Keep the change. For her." He nodded toward the kitchen where the waitress had disappeared. The manager's expression shifted. Confusion, maybe suspicion. He glanced toward the kitchen, then back at Ryan. "For Avery?" Ryan nodded. "Yeah, for Avery." The manager stared at the bills. "That's $52 extra." "I know." The manager studied him for a moment. Then he picked up the bills. "I'll make sure she gets it." Ryan nodded, but he didn't move. He stood there, waiting. The manager noticed. "Something else?" Ryan looked past him. Through the kitchen doorway, Avery was standing near the sink, her back to the room, her shoulders shaking. She was crying, trying to hide it, failing. Ryan looked back at the manager. His voice was quiet but firm. "Tell her it's from leg day. She'll understand." The manager's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he nodded. "All right." Ryan turned and walked back to his booth. But he didn't sit down. He stayed standing, watching, waiting. The manager walked into the kitchen. He approached Avery and said something. She turned. Her face was streaked with tears. The manager handed her the money. She looked at it, then at him. Her mouth opened. The manager said something else, pointed toward Ryan's booth. Avery looked over. Her eyes met Ryan's across the room. Confusion, gratitude, question. all mixed together. Ryan didn't look away. He stood there, let her see him, let her know someone noticed, someone cared. The room around them continued its noise. But between Ryan and Avery, something quieter passed. An understanding, a recognition. Avery wiped her face with her sleeve. She mouthed something. Ryan couldn't hear it, but he read her lips. "Thank you." He nodded once. Then he walked back to his booth and sat down. He wasn't done yet. Avery came out of the kitchen a minute later. Her eyes were still red, but she'd wiped her face. Her hair was tied back tighter now. Her apron was straightened. The money Ryan had given her was folded carefully in her pocket. She could feel the weight of it. $52. More than she made in tips most days. More than anyone had ever given her just for being seen. She carried a fresh pot of coffee and moved through the room with the same careful precision as before. But something had shifted. Her shoulders weren't hunched anymore. Her steps were still slow, still painful. But there was something steadier about her now, like someone had reminded her she was worth more than the worst moment of her morning. She refilled cups at the counter. The two women in office clothes didn't look up, didn't whisper. They just sat there quietly. Avery moved on. She cleared a table near the door, brought out plates from the kitchen. The manager watched her from behind the register. His expression was unreadable. Not angry, not sympathetic. Just watching. Maybe wondering what had just happened. Maybe realizing he should have done more. Ryan sat in his booth. He hadn't left. He'd thought about it. Thought about walking out and letting the money speak for itself. But something kept him there. The feeling that this wasn't finished yet. That leaving now would be taking the easy way out. And he'd spent 3 years learning that the easy way rarely felt right afterward. He watched Avery move through the room. Watched the way people avoided looking at her now. Not out of judgment, out of guilt. They knew what they'd done. They knew what they'd thought. And now they were pretending it hadn't happened because that was easier than acknowledging it. Ryan knew that pattern. He'd seen it his whole life. People made assumptions, laughed at what they didn't understand, then moved on like it had never happened, like their cruelty was just a moment. Just a joke, nothing worth remembering. But the people on the receiving end remembered. They carried it. Every laugh, every whisper, every judgment. It built up over time until you started to believe that's all you were worth. That's all people would ever see. He wouldn't let that be the end of Avery's morning. Wouldn't let her walk away thinking the money was all she deserved. Thinking that kindness only came in dollars and silence. Ryan waited until she made her way back to his section. She approached his table slowly. Her hands gripped the coffee pot. She looked at him with confusion. Maybe wariness. He'd already paid. Already tipped more than anyone ever had. What else could he possibly want? She stopped at the edge of the booth. Her voice was quiet, hesitant. "You didn't have to do that." Ryan leaned back. "I wanted to." She shifted her weight from one leg to the other. Winced. Tried to hide it, but Ryan saw it anyway. Saw the way her face tightened, the way her breath caught. She was still in pain. Still pushing through. He gestured toward the empty seat across from him. "Sit down for a minute." Avery glanced toward the manager. He was busy with a customer. She looked back at Ryan. Her voice dropped lower. "I can't. I'm working." "Sit down," Ryan said again. His voice was firm but not unkind. "Just for a minute. Your legs need the break." She looked around one more time. The diner was still busy, but nobody was watching them. Nobody cared. They'd all moved on to their own lives, their own problems, their own breakfasts. Avery set the coffee pot on the table and slid into the booth across from him. Her movements were stiff, painful. She kept her hands in her lap and didn't look at him directly, like she was afraid that meeting his eyes would make her cry again. And she'd cried enough for one morning. Ryan leaned forward slightly, kept his voice low, calm. "You okay?" Avery blinked. The question caught her off guard. Not because he'd asked, but because he'd asked like he actually wanted to know. Like her answer mattered. She opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded quickly. Too quickly. Yeah, I'm fine. You don't look fine. Her jaw tightened. She looked away, stared out the window at the gas station across the street, at the normal world moving forward like nothing had happened. I'm just sore. From the gym. Last night. Ryan nodded. Leg day? She looked back at him. Surprise flickered across her face. Yeah. How did you know? Because I've been there, Ryan said. And I've seen what it looks like when someone's trying to work through it. Avery's shoulders relaxed slightly. Just slightly. Like hearing someone understand was enough to ease some of the tension she'd been carrying. She glanced around the room. Nobody was paying attention. The world had moved on. She looked back at Ryan. I didn't mean for it to sound the way it did, she said. Her voice was small, tired. What I said. I just couldn't bend down and I wasn't thinking and it just came out. I know. People thought I meant something else. I know. She bit her lip. Her eyes were starting to well up again. She blinked hard, trying to hold it back, trying to stay professional. I can't lose this job. I need it. I can't afford to get fired because I said something stupid. Ryan studied her for a moment, really looked at her. She was young, early 20s maybe, trying to build something, trying to be better, working a job she probably hated to pay for a life she was still figuring out. He knew that struggle. He was still living it. He leaned back. His voice was steady. Sure. What you said wasn't stupid. Avery shook her head. It sounded bad. People laughed. People laugh at things they don't understand, Ryan said. Doesn't make them right. She didn't respond, just stared down at her hands. Her fingers twisted together, nervous, ashamed, like she'd done something wrong by being human, by being in pain, by saying it out loud. Ryan leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped lower. You know what I saw when you said that? She looked up. Her eyes met his, cautious, waiting for the other shoe to drop. What? Someone in pain. Someone trying to do their job. Someone who's been on their feet too long and pushed too hard and is barely holding it together. That's what I saw. Avery's eyes started to water. She blinked hard, but the tears came anyway. She wiped them away quickly. Her voice cracked. That's not what everyone else saw. I know, Ryan said, but everyone else wasn't paying attention. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. I'm sorry. I don't usually cry at work. You don't need to apologize. She laughed, a short, wet sound. Half sob, half disbelief. I've been apologizing all morning. Ryan smiled faintly. Yeah, I noticed. Avery wiped her face again. She took a breath, steadied herself, pulled herself back together piece by piece. Thank you. For the tip. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. Why? Ryan thought about how to answer that. He thought about his daughter, about the mornings he'd dropped her off at school and watched her walk through the doors with her shoulders hunched, about the times she'd come home crying because kids had been cruel, because teachers had been dismissive, because the world had been unkind. He thought about the kind of person he wanted her to become, the kind of person he wanted her to see in the world, the kind of person he needed to be so she'd know it was possible. He looked at Avery, at her red eyes and tired face and worn-out shoes, at the way she was trying so hard to hold herself together, at the way she'd shown up to work even though her body was screaming at her to stay home, at the way she'd kept going even when people laughed. Because you deserved it, he said simply. Avery's lip trembled. She didn't say anything, just nodded, like she wanted to believe him, like she was trying to let herself believe that someone could see her as more than a joke, more than a moment of embarrassment, more than disposable. Ryan stood up. You should get back to work before your manager notices. She stood too, slower, grimacing. She picked up the coffee pot. Her hands were steadier now. Yeah, probably. Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was old, creased. The corners were bent from being carried around in his wallet for too long. He handed it to her. "If you ever need someone to talk to, or if you need help, call me." Avery took the card. She looked at it. "Read the name. Ryan Cole. Handyman. General labor. A phone number. Nothing fancy. Nothing important. Just a guy trying to make a living." She looked back at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because nobody should have to do this alone," Ryan said. "And I mean that." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face, looking for the catch, the angle, the thing he wanted in return. But there was nothing. Just a stranger who'd decided to care when nobody else would. She slipped the card into her apron pocket, next to the money, next to the hope that maybe people like him still existed. "Thank you." Ryan nodded, but he didn't turn to leave. Not yet. He had one more thing to do. One more thing that needed saying. He looked past Avery, at the diner still humming with conversation, at the two women still whispering near the counter, at the man who'd laughed, at the couple who'd complained about the fork, at everyone who'd turned a girl's pain into entertainment, into a joke, into something they could mock and forget. His voice rose, not shouting, but loud enough, clear enough, steady enough, so everyone could hear. "She's in pain. From training. Not from what you're thinking." The diner went quiet. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Coffee cups paused at lips. Heads turned. Everyone looked at Ryan, then at Avery, then back at Ryan. The silence was immediate, total, like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. Ryan didn't look away. He stood there. Let them see him. Let them hear him. Let them feel the weight of what he was saying. "She worked out yesterday, leg day. Her muscles are sore." That's what she meant, nothing else. The silence deepened, spread, settled over the room like a heavy blanket. The two women near the counter looked down at their coffee, suddenly very interested in the steam rising from their cups. The man who'd laughed shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, caught. The couple with the phones suddenly found their breakfast very interesting. Anything to avoid looking at the waitress they'd dismissed, the girl they'd judged. Nobody said anything. Nobody laughed. Nobody smirked. They just sat there, quiet, ashamed, realizing what they'd done, what they'd assumed, what they'd been. Ryan's voice was quieter now, but it carried. Calm, steady, undeniable. "Maybe, next time, before you laugh at someone, you ask what's wrong. Maybe you help instead of judge. Maybe you remember that everyone you meet is fighting something you know nothing about." He let the words hang there, let them settle, let them sink into the silence, into the guilt, into the realization that cruelty was always a choice. And today, they'd chosen wrong. Then he turned back to Avery. Her eyes were wide, tears streaming down her face now. But she was smiling, a small, fragile smile, but real, genuine, the kind of smile that came from being defended, from being seen, from mattering to someone. Ryan nodded to her. Once, a quiet acknowledgement, a silent promise that she wasn't alone, that she was worth defending, that she mattered. Then he turned and walked toward the door. His boots echoed in the silent room, each step deliberate, purposeful. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The entire diner held its breath, watching him go, watching him leave them with their shame, their guilt, their silence. Ryan pushed through the door and stepped out into the cool morning air. The sun was higher now, warmer. The street looked the same. The gas station across the road, the tired storefronts, the normal world. But something had changed. Something small, something quiet, but real. The door swung shut behind him, and inside, the silence remained. Heavy, uncomfortable, but necessary. Avery stood there holding the coffee pot. The card was in her pocket. The $52 was folded in her apron. Her legs still hurt. Her shift wasn't over. But she wasn't crying anymore. Not from shame, not from pain. These were different tears: relief, gratitude, hope, the kind that came from knowing someone had stood up for you when you couldn't stand up for yourself. She wiped her face with her sleeve, took a deep breath, and got back to work. The two women near the counter left quietly 5 minutes later. They didn't finish their coffee, didn't ask for a refill, just left money on the table and walked out without looking at anyone. The tip was larger than usual, guilt money, but Avery took it anyway. The man who'd laughed paid his bill and walked out without making eye contact. He left a $10 bill on the counter for a $6 breakfast. Didn't wait for change, just left, fast. Like staying would mean having to face what he'd done. The couple with the phones ate quickly, finished their meal in silence, left a $20 for a $15 check. They didn't ask Avery for anything else, didn't complain, didn't look at her, just left, quietly, ashamed. The manager watched it all. He didn't say anything, but when Avery passed by the register, carrying a tray of dirty dishes, he stopped her. "You okay?" he asked. His voice was different, softer, like maybe he was realizing he should have asked that question an hour ago. Avery nodded. "Yeah, I'm okay." The manager looked at her for a moment. Then he gave her a small nod. "Take your break early if you need it." "Thanks," Avery said. She didn't take the break. She kept working, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant crying, and she'd cried enough. Ryan walked to his truck and climbed in. He sat there for a moment with his hands on the steering wheel, the keys in the ignition, the engine still off. He thought about the look on Avery's face, the way the room had gone silent, the way people had looked down instead of meeting his eyes. He thought about his daughter, about picking her up from school later, about the conversation they'd have on the drive home, about the lessons he was teaching her, not by talking, by doing, by showing her that kindness mattered, that standing up mattered, that seeing people mattered. He started the engine. The truck rumbled to life. He pulled out of the parking lot. The diner shrank in the rearview mirror. The street opened up ahead. He had a job to get to, drywall work. $10 an hour, hard work, honest work, the kind that left your back aching and your hands rough. But it paid, and that was enough. He had a daughter to pick up later, a life to keep moving forward, bills to pay, responsibilities to meet, the same struggles as yesterday, the same fight as tomorrow. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he'd left something better behind him than what he'd found. Sometimes the thing that silences a room isn't power, isn't money, isn't status. It's kindness. The kind that shows up when nobody's watching. The kind that says, "You matter." The kind that reminds people what it means to be human. Ryan didn't know if Avery would ever call him. Didn't know if the money would help or if the card would end up in the trash. Didn't know if anything he'd done would make a difference tomorrow, or next week, or next year. But that wasn't the point. The point was that he'd tried, that he'd seen someone in pain and decided not to look away, that he'd chosen kindness when cruelty was easier, that he'd stood up when sitting down was safer. And in a world that moves too fast and cares too little, that was enough.